What's going on, Guardians? It's Tizzle here. So we had a patch update this week, and while there were some nerfs that may or may not be intended, there were also some buffs that I want to highlight. First off, I want to talk about Arianas Vow, as I recently did a dedicated video to show its changes. The patch notes say it was buffed to deal 67% more damage to barrier champion shields, but after testing and then watching some footage I have of a Nightfall this season messing around with it in Lucky Pants, I think the buff did not work as intended. The math just ain't mathing. It was hard to compare apples to apples because in my footage I had Solar Surge on my boots, and the Nightfall had Solar Surge, and I was wearing Lucky Pants. But in a few clips, I do hit a barrier shield with no buff of any kind, and it hits for 25,858 damage. And then in my video this week after the changes, I hit for 21,944 damage. Oddly, this is a 17.8% damage difference, when it should be a 25% difference thanks to no Solar Surge in my testing this week. So it seems some kind of buff did go through, but certainly not 67%. If we take the before damage and divide by 1.25% to get rid of Solar Surge, we would be hitting for 20,686 damage. So it seems the buff they gave to Arianas Vow is more like 6% and not 67%. In theory, if we take the 20,686 damage and multiply it by 67%, the intended buff amount, then Arianas would be hitting for 34,546 damage, which would easily take out the barrier shield. Because when I have Radiant, we hit for 27,291 damage, which is enough to break the shield in one hit. And then our body shot with First Glance hits for 13,732 damage. So if we multiply that by 1.67, we get 22,932 damage. So I still think a body shot would not be quite enough to break a barrier shield. Regardless, this was not a 67% buff, as the math clearly shows. So do me a favor and report this interaction on the Bungie.net website so that Bungie can fix it. Hopefully they make it so it will always one-shot a barrier shield. That is because you will always have to two-shot barrier knights because you can't hit crits on them. We shouldn't be punished because Bungie hasn't fixed this interaction of barrier knights having unhittable crits for like 3 years. I just want to use Arianas Vow and not feel like I'm throwing. Make it the anti-barrier GOAT again. Anyways, that was long enough on Arianas Vow. Let's check out some other buffs. The Throwing Hammer Super and the Twilight Arsenal Super got buffed, so I will just play some side-by-side clips of before and after. I slowed the clips down on my own and compared the damage numbers, and I'm pleased to report that they did in fact receive their 20 and 25% buffs. I will show some clips on Greg to show you how hard the supers are hitting for now. As for Twilight Arsenal, it is a great one-off super, especially this season with Expanding Abyss. And if you use a Star Eater exotic class item, you can pump out close to 1,000,000 damage in a hurry. So the next thing I wanted to cover was aggressive frame scout rifles. They increased the PvE damage by a whopping 30% and DMT also got that buff. So how does this feel in game? Well, I tested this with the long arm arc scout rifle with explosive payload, which does add a bit of damage, and arc surge was also on, but if I hit crits, I could reliably 2-tap the low tier red bars, and DMT could almost one-shot red bars to the head. So I would say 2 crits to kill red bars in GM content is not bad at all. Plus, if you have Cranial Spike going on DMT and shoot from the hip, you would be able to one-tap these enemies. And keep in mind that this is the base damage of these weapons. If you had something like Time War and Wayfarer with Precision Instrument and Radiant going, you could be one-tapping low-tier red bars in GM content. And anything that can one-tap a red bar in GMs is very strong. It is typically reserved for bows. In the past, I loved using Le Monarch in the Glassway GM because it always had Void Surge and it was just strong enough to one-shot red bars with the Poison Drain. This was super valuable. So for a weapon that doesn't need a draw time and you can just shoot non-stop, I think these scout rifles are in a really good place right now. Their downfall is having to reload slowly because you can only reload 2 shots at a time. But for the safety they provide by being able to deal big damage at a super far distance, I would say that they are looking very good after this buff. And that brings me to the final buff, the reserves buff. Obviously, I don't know all the reserve totals from before the changes, but my boy Mossy Max on Twitter is doing the work and figuring out all the changes. Most weapons saw themselves get at least 1 more ammo in reserve. I was most excited to test Leviathan's Breath, but sadly it did not get any type of buff. This weapon has never been able to work with reserve mods if you had the catalyst, so I was curious if it would get a bump. Sadly, it did not. As for some of these other weapons that I tested, I do know some base reserve totals from before just off memory, so I will say what those changes are and then show some others. So the first one is fixed odds with field prep. I used this a ton in Season of the Wish, and it used to hold 396 in reserves at base, and now it holds 441, so that is 45 more shots. 441 is an insane amount of ammo for a high impact machine gun. I remember soloing the Insight Terminus GM with my corrective measure way back before any machine gun buffs, and it had like 240 rounds, and it was an adaptive, so that's crazy. Song of Your Ute also holds 390 at base now, and a whopping 495 with triple reserves. Truly crazy. We could already use machine guns like primaries, and now they just got an even bigger reserve buff. And for one more machine gun, I wanted to look at an old favorite of mine, Xenophage. It was the first weapon I checked. So before the changes, it held 28 at base, and now it holds 31. This is only an 11% reserve increase when the patch notes said that weapons with lower reserves would get a larger buff. And then with 3 reserves, it went to 35, and before with 3 reserves, it was 34. So having 3 more shots at base is nice, but I hope they give Xeno what it has needed for years, a catalyst that gives it field prep. The reload animation is atrocious, so this could give us quicker reload and more reserves. So here's hoping that is coming at some point in the future. Regardless, it did see a bit of a buff. Next, I wanted to check the total damage GOAT in Whisper of the Worm. So with triple reserves, it holds 33. This is with field prep, and I think it held the same before. And with no reserves, it holds 29, where before it was 28. So again, a very small buff, but I don't think Whisper was really hurting for more ammo. Cry Mutiny now holds 31 with 3 reserves and 27 at base, probably close to what it was before, and Cataphract holds 30 and 27. So GLs didn't see a huge buff either, but their reserves were buffed not too long ago. As were rocket launchers, which now hold even more. Basically 1 more rocket across the board, as a rule. Dragon's Breath, which certainly didn't need any more love, holds 10 at base and 13 with triple reserves. That's just crazy to me. The strongest gun in the game just got better. Ikelos Sniper Rifle, which is a rapid fire frame which recently got a huge buff to reserves already, holds 24 at base and a whopping 39 with triple reserves. And the Solar Rocket Sidearm of Baron Action now holds 55 at base and 68 with reserves. A weapon I was very excited to test was Sleeper Simulant. It used to hold 16 with triple reserves and 13 with no reserves. I'm happy to announce it now holds 18 with triple reserves and 16 with no reserves. It absolutely needed a reserve buff, so I'm happy it got it. Sadly, triple reserves gives diminishing returns, but it is what it is. And one more weapon, 1000 Voices now holds 11 with no reserves and 12 with triple reserves. But not too long ago, I think the most it could hold was 7, so this has seen a really nice glow up. And I wanted to finish with 1K to talk about something important. With 3 reserve mods, it goes from 11 to 12, Sleeper 16 to 18. You get diminishing returns as you add reserve mods. So the reduction in mod cost from 3 to 2 for reserves is very nice. I'll probably just stick with 1 reserve mod in most content. But it's really important to understand what the reserve mod gives you for every weapon that you're running. Obviously, I did not go through and test the reserves of every weapon with 1, 2, and 3 reserve mods. I just tested some different archetypes and certain exotics that I was curious about. But if I was running a certain loadout for a GM, it's worth testing those with reserve mods to see where you get the most bang for your buck. Like, if you think with Dragon's Breath you're fine with 10, then don't run any reserve mods. But if you're pairing it with the Ikelos Sniper or a Baron Action, maybe you run 1 reserve mod so you get way more sniper or sidearm ammo, plus a bonus rocket. It all comes down to the content and what your specific loadout is. Regardless, I'm very happy they made this change. Running at least 1 reserve mod may now be worth it. Anyways, that is it for the video. I just wanted to highlight some of these changes and show how they work in-game. If you found it helpful and informative, a like and subscription would be greatly appreciated. And if you're still watching, thanks so much for watching to the end. I appreciate it. Catch you in the next one, and take care.